Welcome back to Outdoor Exploration. Today I am going to take you on a kind of overview of some of the edible and some non-edible plants and trees that grow in disturbed, well-traveled urban and semi-urban places. So what we're going to find mostly you can find in any urban, suburban or rural roadsides around South Coastal British Columbia. And so I'm starting today at our ferry dock and close to the marina here, just standing among a whole bunch of edible plants. I just wanted to say today as we go, the purpose is identification. So I'm not going to go into deep detail about how to prepare things because, I mean, I will see hundreds of plants today. I hope to introduce you to maybe 20 or 30. And then I hope you will go and, you know, keep looking at your own surroundings, or come here if you live here, and see what you can find and learn to identify and maybe do some research and find how you can use these things yourself. I brought my very favorite ID book here because people always ask me what book can they buy, and this is always the one I recommend, at least for learning about local plants. Many of these plants aren't actually indigenous, but they're resilient weeds that have spread from European settlers or from wherever they came elsewhere in the world, and they're edible and useful, which sometimes is why they came here. And some of them are indigenous and very useful. So this book is great because it tells many things. Not everything by a long shot, but when you look inside, you can go by families and groupings. So it basically helps you, if you look at the plant, to identify specific shapes and forms and find, you know, the section where you're most likely to find that plant in the book, and then identify it based on its features. And also, it's not only edible plants. I don't recommend having a book of only edible plants because that doesn't necessarily tell you about similar plants that aren't edible. So I prefer to just learn the whole picture. And that's what we're doing. So starting here, actually, let's look above me first. I'm standing here under an alder tree, and all over the ground are catkins. And this is catkin season. So I'll just put the book down. Now it's a little bit late for these catkins here. These are kind of brown and crunchy by now. I'm going to eat it just to show you. Ooh, it crumbles while I just hold it in my hand. That's how dry it is. So just to show you that it is edible, I'll eat it. But honestly, this is not the stage at which you want to eat them. It's kind of like a bitter, dry leaf. It's also growing right next to the ferry traffic and marine traffic, and it's not really a great place to harvest food. But yeah, you can fry these up. You can eat them fresh when they're hopefully younger than this. And they're great food. Alder is also, the leaves here and also the inner bark contains salicylic acid, which you can use to help your headache or a fever. Yeah, not getting into how, but you can. So going down to the ground where we have piles and piles of the catkins fallen here among a bunch of grass. But we have here some little tiny dandelions. I saw a bigger one somewhere. Oh, right here. Here are some slightly bigger ones. So this grass is stepped on constantly, you know, has bikes parked on it, all kinds of things. So nothing here, and is mowed, I think, later in the year. Nothing here will grow very big, but we can still find the edible plants, at least to identify. And then beside these dandelions, I have Western dock. I mean, this looks so fresh and lovely. I would almost eat it if it wasn't right in all this traffic and dog poop area, but it is, so I won't. Western dock is related to burdock. It's useful for frying, eating fresh in salads when they're young. A lot of the leaves that we find, I won't go into detail anymore, but basically if you find a young leaf, it's usually good for salad. As they get older, they get more bitter. They also they can be kind of astringent feeling when they're very young. That's oxalic acid, and it won't hurt you, but it's not very pleasant. So you kind of want them when they're not too young and not so big that they're tough and bitter and, you know, getting those other flavors that we don't want for salad. But when they are tough and bitter, you can still cook them and use them in all kinds of other ways. What else can I find? Oh, blackberries, of course. So we have new leaves coming here. You can use blackberry leaves the same way you use raspberry leaves for tea. And the shoots, you can use them similarly to salmonberry shoots, which we'll find later, I'm sure. Oh, it's very prickly. But they're, well, I won't eat this anyway, but they're, they have these sort of fleshy shoots that come up first, and then the leaves come off of those, and you can peel and cook and eat the shoots. And with salmonberries too. So, oh, this here, I'd like to show you this, even though this isn't edible, but you'll find it everywhere under this big fir bough that fell. This is buttercup. So buttercup is actually poisonous, but it's everywhere, so it deserves mentioning. There you go. Now, I am going to head up the hill a little and take you to some salmonberries and other things. Just beside the parking lot here, among all the holly and blackberries and alder trees and ivy, is also salmonberry. Quite a bit of it here and there, and it is blooming right now. It's rather early this year, actually. There's a lot of it blooming around, and I'm just showing you here. The petals are edible, but they have hardly any flavor. And I recommend only picking a few of them, maybe as a salad decoration or something. A very important thing, and I always like to remind people of this, is that when you pick them, if you want berries, you need to leave something for the bees to find. And this is the case with all flowers, you know, that are producing fruit, but all flowers produce the fruit for the tree, so it's still an important thing to remember. So if I'm picking these, I only grab on and pick 2 opposing petals from each flower, and that leaves a nice focal point for the bees still to find and pollinate this flower. Yum. In addition to the flowers, obviously there are the berries later on in the spring, well, into the summer really, and also the shoots, which I can't find any right now, but they should be starting around here and there, and then in another month or 2 there will be plenty of them. Large thick shoots, like I mentioned, from blackberries. Blackberries and salmonberries are related. They're both rubus family, and they both have delicious edible shoots and leaves that you can use for tea, just like raspberries, which are also in the rubus family. Yeah, let's go see what else we find. So I have come to the community school here, just for another example of how one of our very popular public spaces is full of wild food. Stop there, because look what I find. Yet another place. I wouldn't necessarily eat this, but there's just piles and piles of bittercress growing here. You know, right beside a very popular trail. This has probably been peed and pooped on by many dogs, but this is a kind of mustard, and if I spread it out, you can see that it has kind of a whorl of leaves. They all come out from the center, and each one has many little, well, I should say of stems, and each one has many little leaves growing from it that have that classic kind of, I don't know what to call it, but mustard shape. So bittercress tastes fabulous in sandwiches, salads, anywhere that you might normally have cress, you know, like with cream cheese in a sandwich, or cucumber. Yeah, and it's everywhere right now. This is like cress major season. You'll also find it in flower. I don't happen to see any right here, but it gets little tiny white flowers, and those are edible too. The whole plant is edible. And since I'm here, I'll point out that there's buttercup everywhere. And yeah, I hope I'm not going to go into ferns. There are sword ferns here, none of which are particularly edible, as well as all kinds of coniferous trees, which many of which are edible or useful medicinally, but I'm not going to go into that. Here's another salmonberry. just because it gets too much. So we're going to stick to green plants that we find along edges of roads today, for the most part, and anything else that's especially lovely in this season. Let's go down here, because one of my favorite things in this season is just down here. Maple trees. So look at this gorgeous, gorgeous maple tree here, with the sun shining beautifully on the moss. And it's full of licorice ferns up there in the top, you can see. The two most wonderful things about this, which is a big leaf maple, not a sugar maple, and you know, I'm not writing off maple syrup, obviously, and you can make maple syrup from these, but I've never done it. Apparently, it requires so much of the sap in order to boil down enough to make the syrup, as opposed to sugar maples, which require a little less. You still have to boil it down forever, but this is forever more. It's just slightly inferior tasting and much more labor intensive to make. But the two most wonderful things about this tree in this season, and it's not time yet, but the first one that I'm telling you about is the blossoms. So in a few weeks' time, all these tiny little buds here will open up and become first a sort of a tight green clump of blossoms, and then they'll slowly open up into this bright yellow green inflorescence. What would you call it? It's like a bush of blossoms. They're so gorgeous, and they can be huge, and they're delicious. I mean, I eat a whole salad of them. The stem and all the little blossoms, they're amazing. You can't see it right now, but just know that it's coming, and keep a watch on any maple trees whose low-hanging branches you can reach. But what we should be able to find, I hope, I say crossing my fingers, are maple cotyledons. So let's have a look and hope. Of course, after the blossom come seeds, and the seeds fall to the ground every year, and out come the shoots. Well, cotyledons, which is that first two pair of leaves, right? Now, of course, I'm finding none. Here's one single cotyledon. Maybe more are coming. I thought maybe we'd missed them, but I actually think they're not coming early like everything else. So here it is, this tiny little thing. It's a little bit crimped looking even from where it unfolded itself out of the leaf. Anyway, I mean out of the seed. But you can, if there are a lot of those, pick them up and use them also for salad and stir fries and all sorts of things. Yeah, they're delicious. Here's something worth mentioning. This is digitalis, or foxglove, and it's popping up all over the place right now, but many people confuse it with burdock. Burdock is edible, foxglove is medicinal, like you've heard of digitalis, heart medication, but you certainly wouldn't eat it. It's poisonous. It will do to your heart what the medication does, but in a very uncontrolled way. So it does have these rather soft looking leaves. They're not as soft as burdock usually are, but when they're young, but they're also a totally different shape. I can't show you burdock right now because it's actually not up yet, which is one of the signs to look for. You'll find old stems of burdock. I don't see any around here right now, but old burdock stems with burrs on them. That'll tell you where the burdock will come up, and at some point it will come up looking sort of similar to this. But burdock leaves are heart-shaped, so I'll cut this with my fingernail to approximately the shape of a burdock leaf. Now we have, well, I didn't do a very great job, but anyway, now we have a foxglove leaf masquerading as a burdock leaf, sort of. So that is the difference. Burdock leaves are this shape, foxglove leaves are spear-shaped, and you don't want to eat foxglove, obviously. But it's everywhere now, so watch for it, because we'll get the beautiful flowers. Oh, and I should say, just because it's poisonous doesn't mean we need to fear it. You can smell it. It smells bitter and bad. Loud car. And yeah, but it's not going to hurt you if you're not eating it. So one thing I just see over here, which are all around right now are snowberries. This is not edible, but they're all over the place, so I thought I'd point them out. There are a few little shrivelly berries left from last year, and that's what they are, snowberries. They are not, as some people say, soap berries. We did as kids used to pop them and squish them up in our hands, and some people called them soap, but these are not soap berries. Soap berries are red with, like, they're white inside, and they can be eaten. I don't know if you can hear me with all the trucks going by, but anyway. Soap berries are edible, and they're red on the outside, edible to some degree, and snowberries are not. Remember that. There are lots of them though. One thing that is all over the place, and I'm just beside the public trail here, are wild plums. So keep a lookout for them, and you can see they're in flower right now, maybe for another week or two, depending on the weather, I guess, or depending where you are. And yeah, sprays of white flowers. They're just gorgeous right now. Here's some burdock I had mentioned just a little bit ago with the foxglove. So like I said, you won't see anything of the green leaves coming out this year, but here are the burrs. And I mean, we all know these from our pets or our children or our clothing or whatever. But it's the root actually that is the best part for me. You can actually, right now even, dig them up if you're strong and patient, because they like to grow in, they have long, thick tap roots. And I actually have a whole video on processing a burdock root, so I'm not going to explain it, but it's edible just as a root vegetable, but it also makes a really fabulous tea or, you know, quote, coffee. Oh, finally, a lot more maple cotyledons. Here, come look over here. Where are there more to show you? So, just so you know, I mean, these two are right beside the trail and all coming up from the brush here. And you can see this one's only just come out. Here we go. A whole bunch down in that little pocket. I guess the seeds, oh, coming right out of the gravel here. They're everywhere. So this is exactly when you want them, when they're nice and fresh and before the deer get them. Yeah, although preferably not exactly right on the trail. So these would have come from that tree right there. All right, let's see what else we find. So as I've said in a very recent video, these horsetail stems from last year or stalks, I don't know what you call them, are the sign that this is where to look for horsetails in the spring. Another way to look for them is deer eating them, because they do. Horsetails are not edible when they are tall, like when you see those classic, what are actually the leafy fronds of the horsetails, but the fertile stems, which must be in here somewhere because it's the time for them right now, are edible when they're tiny, which is why the deer are here eating them. So this is how you find them at this point in the year. So these are the fertile heads or stems, and they will grow up to make those long, I didn't get very much, but they will grow tall, and it'll be those stalks that we know with the pollen head on the top. So I can peel the little outside part off here and show you this very, very young little pollen head. And perhaps you recognize this from when usually they're, this big when we see them, and if you give them a tap, all the pollen will release. But the deer snarfle around in the grass, and they find them when they're this big, and they'll just bite off the tops. And when I do that, you can actually see the two different parts of them. This will be the stalk, and then this is the actual fertile parts here around the outside, those little balls that we see. So the deer eat this and leave the rest behind, which then grows up and fertilizes all the whatever, creates the next generation of them. So here's something that's coming up everywhere right now, and they're still pretty tiny, but over the year they'll get big. This is herb Robert. So they're easy to recognize because of, oh, and I should also say Robert geranium, it's also called. It's a type of geranium. And they're easy to recognize because they have reddish stems. So sometimes the stems are more green than red, but usually you'll find at least a little tinge of red. Sometimes they're brilliant, kind of magenta, as you can see in the middle of this one here. And it is a geranium. I wouldn't eat a whole lot of it all at once, but I do put it in smoothies. It has been shown to be effective against flu infections and things like that. Yeah, it's edible. You can also dry it and make tea from it. So that's something actually that most of us have in our gardens as a weed, so you can use it when you pull it out. So lastly, remember at that maple tree back at the school, I was mentioned briefly that there was licorice fern up in it, but there was no way I could get to that, so I found one. And first of all, before I even talk about the greatness of licorice fern, which I adore, I just want to mention that this moss on the maple tree is an ecosystem in itself. Or, well, I don't know if you can say that scientifically, but it's holding the water on the tree. It's providing a habitat for all kinds of different species, insects, plants, microbes, all kinds of things, mushrooms, and basically it's part of the big cycle of nutrients. So maple trees actually are kind of like an umbrella of life, especially if you're looking for food. You can find wall lettuce under them, nettles, which we haven't seen today, but they do often grow under maple trees, plantains, various types of them, that herb Robert that we saw, I mean, it grows all over, but including under maple trees. I'm missing a bunch of things, but anyway, there are lots of things that really like to grow here, and quite often in a deeper forest you'll find a clearing with a maple tree, or a few maple trees together, as we have here, although there's a road here too, but you know, it still is a little maple biome in the middle of a larger coniferous forest. And yeah, so if you're looking for food in the forest, oh yeah, and currants, all kinds of berries you'll find growing under maples sometimes. Ferns, things that need the sunshine and the nutrients provided by the maple tree, you will find there, which many of which are edible foods. So licorice fern, let's see if I can reach this. What you want to do to harvest licorice fern, most importantly, is not damage the tree. So I'm going to reach only the one I can and look in here. Now remember, it needs the moss, so we're going to leave the moss, and at the base of this stem I can feel a piece of root, so I follow it along to the end and pull it out, hopefully without pulling out too much moss. There we go. Now I clean it off a bit. I consider this super clean because it is filtered by the roots of the moss and all the water constantly running over it, protected by pollution from the moss, like the exhaust from the road up there, etc. So you can actually just eat it right off the tree. Now, just to show you, this is the only little demonstration I'm going to do today. You see how the frond grows here out of the root. There's actually a little tiny nub starting where it's going to, or it would if I hadn't picked it, grow a new little root along there. This lighter end is the freshest part of the root, and this is the older root. And if I had pulled out more, it would probably find that it would get darker and darker, and there would even be black parts. Those are edible, but they have less flavor. They're older and they're tougher. Sometimes they're so tough there's really nothing. You can't even taste them. There's nothing left. And this, because it's so fresh, remember I mentioned oxalic acid in the beginning of this video? It has more oxalic acid. So this part will be more astringent, sort of bitter, this sharp flavor of oxalic acid. And this sort of darker, older part will have grown beyond that stage and have a sweeter, more licoricey flavor. Some people find this just revolting. It's licorice, but on steroids. it's the strongest licorice you've ever had. I mean, it's not actually licorice, but it's a licorice flavor. And it's calming. It makes a wonderful tea. So if you don't like the strength that you taste in this, just remember that you can dry it or even use it fresh to make licorice root or licorice fern tea. Yum. I'm one of the people who likes very strong flavors. So that being my last wild food for this video, I want to talk just very, very briefly about the ethics of harvesting wild food. It's actually a huge industry, or a growing industry. And in some ways, I think that's wonderful, because I mean, my life's work, and the reason I'm making this video, the reason I lead wild food tours, is to connect people with our ecology, so that you understand that for thousands of years, people have been harvesting this root, all kinds of the various berries and all the wild foods that are available here. I mean, some of them are imported, but other foods too that we're not talking about today, or that don't grow exactly right here. But here's the thing. If everybody was to go out and pick the licorice fern, obviously there would be none left. And we're not the only people here. So my personal opinion is that it is unethical to be making a living off of plants that grow in the forest that is not yours. And when I say not yours, I don't mean you should own the forest. I mean, really, the forest isn't anybody's. I think that if we all were living in harmony with our ecology, that would be different. I don't think that there's a problem at all with, having a little bit of licorice fern for yourself, or picking berries and making a pie for yourself in the summer. I do think there's a problem, obviously, with pillaging the wilderness. And I think that we all have to think very carefully about our activities, whether it's harvesting or just exploring and playing, building forts. What are we doing, and how is it harming the ecology of our ecosystem? Because we're part of this. So for me, that is ethical foraging. It means really, really thinking about the impact of every single thing you do. I know this is going to grow back. I know that as long as 100 people don't come here and harvest a piece of licorice fern, this isn't going to be a problem. But I have to always think about that. There are also permissions questions. Whose land are you harvesting from? We're settlers. So, this is Nuchlelachum, also known as Bowen Island, on Squamish territory. Have I asked permission to harvest this? No. I really, really, truly believe that if we're out on any crown land where it is legal by our settler government to harvest a bunch of food and sell it for income, we need to have the permission of the First Nations who actually lived and still live on that territory. So that's my personal opinion, but it's deeply held. And I think ethics is always something we need to consider in food exploration and life. So having said that, enjoy your foraging, enjoy your exploration. Happy exploring. Bye-bye.